So you probably watched my recent vid on Trump trying to make Antifa a terrorist organization. And I explained how Antifa isn't an organization. You cannot buy a card for it. There is no membership card. There's no central place where you can join up. It's just, it's an anti-fascist position that hopefully a lot of people should take. And yet, apparently, Trump wants to make having an anti-fascist position a crime in a way. He wants to put people in jail for 10 years if they are basically, he calls it rioting, but basically it's righteous anger. And he also wants to label anybody who is against fascism a terrorist. Now that's very special, a very special position that El Duce 45 has decided is something that he's going to go for into his probably next presidency in 2020 this year. It could be the case that he gets in, or it may not be, depending on how well he handles this COVID-19 crisis from now on, just abandoning the public to their own devices, not paying them a universal basic income or providing a federal job guarantee, none of that. He's basically abandoned the public. So it could be his downfall by being the me president that he is and not using his noggin and realizing that if you leave 30 million people unemployed and you don't help them out, that's going to probably blow back at you. So anyway, but Trump is sort of a neo-fascist, really. And I want to play you a little excerpt from something I saw in Jason Unruhe's page. He's talking about what he would like to do to rioters. And just listen to how he talks. It's a little bit hard to understand, but it's got subtitles.
We're strongly looking for arrests. You have to get much tougher. You're going to get over it. I know Governor Walz is on the phone, and we spoke. And I fully agree with the way he handled it the last couple of days. I asked him to do that. Get a lot of men. We have all the men and women that you need. If people aren't calling them up, you have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a punching jerk. You have to dominate. And you have to arrest people, and you have to try people. And they have to go to jail for long periods of time. These are radicals, and they're anarchists. They're anarchists, whether you like it or not. I know some of you guys are different persuasion, and that's okay. I fully understand it. I understand both. I'm for everybody. I'm representing everybody. I'm not representing radical right, radical left. I'm representing everybody. But you have to know what you're dealing with. And it's happened before. It's happened numerous times. And the only time it's successful is when you're weak. And most of you are weak. Washington was under very good control, but we're going to have it under much more control. We're going to pull in thousands of people. And we were under guard of the D.C. police, the mayor of Washington, D.C. And Secret Service did a very good job around the White House, but their primary function is around the White House. But we're going to clamp down very, very strong. But you got to arrest people, you have to track people, you have to put them in jail for 10 years, and you'll never see this stuff again. And you have to let them know that.
So he's a coward, Trump. He's been hiding in his bunker in the White House and has the military protecting him. And he's threatened to call the military out on the public for simply showing righteous anger, not only about George Floyd's killing and state violence against black people and people of color, but it's much bigger than that. It's actually that disaster capitalism, people have realized that it is a failed state, that the U.S. is a failed state. It won't and cannot provide for its citizens. More likely, it won't provide for its citizens. So the U.S. is a failed state at this point, and people have realized this, and they have no faith in their government anymore, and I would say that's probably both sides of the aisle. So I wanted to just, after sharing that thing about Trump, after sharing that audio of Trump talking about dominating and putting people in prison for 10 years for protesting. And by the way, the mainstream media likes to present all the protesters as looters and rioting and smashing things, but that's actually not the case. That's just the mainstream media propping up Trump, because a lot of it's owned by the Murdoch media, the Murdoch press, and also a lot of it is owned by corporations, and corporations want the protests to end. They want things to go back to normal because they want the capitalist system to keep on going and exploiting everybody as it does. It's inherently exploitative. It's also failed capitalism. Capitalism is often associated with fascism, and capitalism is also inextricably linked with imperialism. So it's like a three-headed monster, basically. Anyway, so if the US is a failed state and it's flipping over into neo-fascism in a full-on way, if it's going to start heading that way permanently and in a big way, and if it's not just Trump using anything he can to hold on to power, but he's not really committed to it. If it's like that, it probably doesn't matter because it's going to continue on after he leaves. The Democrats, if they ever got in, are not going to reverse a lot of that stuff that's going on. They love as much power as they can get, and they don't care how they get it. Dr. Lawrence Britt explained fascist regimes of Hitler, Germany, Mussolini, Italy, and Franco, Spain, and he found 14 defining characteristics common to those fascist regimes. One was powerful and continuing nationalism. Well, fascist regimes tend to make constant use of patriotic mottos, slogans, symbols, songs, and other paraphernalia. Flags are seen everywhere, as are flag symbols on clothing and in public displays. Well, that's the US all over. Number two is disdain for the recognition of human rights because of fear of enemies and the need for security. The people in fascist regimes are persuaded that human rights can be ignored in certain cases because of quote-unquote need. The people tend to look the other way or even approve of torture, summary executions, assassinations, long incarcerations of prisoners, etc. Well, that's something you could say is definitely a characteristic of the US empire. It ignores human rights and has even threatened the International Crimes Court that they're going to harass people that are in the judges and associated personnel that are in the ICC. They're going to harass them, basically. And they said they actually even have this thing where if the International Crimes Court goes to investigate them on crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, that they have the right. They are going to basically invade them. Pompeo has said numerous things about the ICC and is sort of basically it refuses to have them investigate any crimes of the US empire or of Israel. And they ignore human rights in their own country. You see this over and over again with in just the case of black people being killed by the state with impunity. Police often get away with literally murder, and this George Floyd murder is just a more overt murder that's happened on camera and in full view, white supremacy in full view, and those cops knew they were being filmed and they didn't care. That's how brazen they are, which shows that it's a culture, and they are emboldened by a neo-fascist in office and think that they can get away with it. But they were getting away with it before Trump came into power, and Trump is not an aberration. He is just the mask of empire pulled off. And that's why a lot of those politicians on the other side, the Democratic Party, want him gone, and the CIA, probably a lot in the CIA, want him gone, because they need smooth operators like Obama so that they can sell their nonsense to the world and keep dominating, but have a very smooth brand in front of the camera, so they can do all these awful things behind the camera and no one will take any notice, because how could somebody like Obama do awful things, and yet he did dreadful things while he was in office. And everybody thought he was wonderful then, a lot of people, and a lot of people now think he's wonderful and wish that he would come back. So that's the sort of person they want in office. They don't want somebody like Trump who they can't really trust will follow their direction, follow the national security state direction. They don't trust that he will. He's all about himself. So if something serves his purpose and it's not in keeping with what the national security state want, then he'll just go ahead and do it. And they want somebody that is controllable. Trump isn't that, even though he's done everything that his donors wanted, like Sheldon Adelson and Mercer. He's doing what they want, And he's doing some things that the CIA want because he was giving them a hard time in the beginning, and I think they started to give him a hard time, and I think Russiagate was all a part of that. So he's pulled his head in a bit when it comes to, he's probably been doing their bidding too. But on the whole, particularly if and when he gets into office in 2020, he's probably going to be even more brazen because he'll think, well, I can do whatever I want. I'm not up for re-election in 2024. And he might go for it. And they're afraid that he's going to just be uncontrollable. You cannot be uncontrollable. That the national security state won't allow it. The third sign of a fascist state is identification of enemies, scapegoats as a unifying cause. The people are rallied into a unifying patriotic frenzy over the need to eliminate a perceived common threat or foe, racial, ethnic, or religious minorities, liberals, communists, socialists, terrorists. Well, all of the above. You can see that over and over again. And it only takes a click of the finger and the mainstream media manufacturing consent, and then a lot of the population start heading that way, starting to not be on side with the protesters. They're starting to really get behind the anti-Chinese propaganda. They got behind the anti-Russian propaganda. They got behind the anti-socialist propaganda, the anti-communist propaganda. It seems like it's very, very easy when you have an uneducated population. A lot of people aren't educated about the past, about history, and so they tend to just follow along with populist leaders who look like they're populist, and powerful or convincing figures. They just go along with it. It's like children following a father off a cliff. It's kind of like that. That's my feeling about it. Just people who are completely lost and do not have anything to live for, and then they see someone who, even though it's very obvious Trump is not on their side, he's not doing anything for his base except to stir up hate, and they go along with it because they're very angry and racist, a lot of them. And I'm not saying all his base are like that, but it's very easy to stir people up and turn them towards minority groups and stuff. So anyway, or groups that are being targeted as something, that's going to interfere, or something that the particular figure doesn't like socialism, because he's a capitalist. They don't want anything that's going to interfere with capital. They don't want anything that's going to interfere with their profits, and they see socialism as something that is going to do that. So anything that smacks of socialism, even if it's not even socialist, even just remotely, that's going to be vilified and targeted. So supremacy, number 4, supremacy of the military. Well, that's pretty easy. The US military is by far the greatest military on the planet. They spend trillions and trillions of dollars on the military and spend very little on the public. So that's not, and they've got 1,000 bases worldwide. So number 5, rampant sexism. That's pretty obvious now with Donald Trump. But, you can see that also with Joe Biden. They hide it better on the left. They hide it better on the Democratic Party. But rampant sexism, yeah, well, anyway, Trump, that's Trump. Number 6 is control mass media. Well, I think there's 6 corporations that own the media in the US. And you only have to look at the mainstream media to see how they sing from the same song sheet, basically. And they're often just repeating talking points from the national security state. Number 7, obsession with national security. Well, it's been like that particularly since 9/11, and that was used as an excuse to take away civil liberties and bring in the NDAA, the Patriot Act. And it's been a downhill slide, even on a real roller coaster slide downhill, escalated much more since 9/11. Homeland security and all of that. We have that even here in Australia now. We have a sort of a type of a home security thing, which is run by an authoritarian wannabe Peter Dutton. So corporate power is protected. Well, corporations are people, don't you know? So that's a law in the United States. Corporations it's an inverted totalitarian state, the US. Labor power is suppressed. Yes, they've done everything they can to destroy labor movements and continue to do so. Disdain for intellectuals and the arts. They've been closing down all the humanities and all the arts programs. Here in Australia, they've been doing that. and making business. It's all about business. And I'd say that's probably to some degree the case in the United States. I'm not sure about that one. Obsession with crime and punishment, the mass incarceration of black people, the crime bill from the Bill Clinton era, which Joe Biden wholeheartedly supported and gave a very impassioned speech about locking up what he considers super predators, or as Hillary Clinton called them super predators, and he actually called them predators. I've shown there is a clip of that I've shown in a couple of videos ago. So they do have an obsession with crime and punishment. They don't have an obsession with social equality and getting people out of poverty and having paying people and getting corporations to pay a living wage to people and raising the minimum wage. No, they have an obsession with locking people up because the private prisons make a killing, and the more the merrier in the prisons. And also those prisoners also are creating garments for corporations for $1 a day or something, or a couple of dollars a day, and they're making they're used as call-in centers. I mean, it's like it's slavery all over again, basically. You've got people in prisons, mostly black people, doing work for less, for nothing almost, and then they have the privilege of then having to pay debts when they get out of the private prisons. They have to actually pay for various things that they had in the private prisons. 13 is rampant cronyism and corruption. So, well, that's pretty clear that at this point that Trump is running a kleptocracy there, but it was already that before he got in. He's just making it more obvious, and also he thinks he can just get away with anything. So he's got his daughter in on it, his son-in-law. He's basically, it's a family thing, and he probably would like to have a dynasty. Like Bush, he would like to have his daughter probably become president, or his son, Donald Trump Jr. So the cronyism, and also, if you look into his presidency, particularly during this COVID crisis, he's been giving all his corporate mates different, things to do that he's going to fund them to do things to address the COVID-19 pandemic, and rather than actually picking people who are better for these jobs, he's picking his friends and giving them loads and loads of money, and it's just one big ad for those corporations. You only had to look at when he was doing his morning speeches, and he'd have all these different mates come up from Honeywell and I think it was even Boeing. There was different ones coming up, and they were doing a big ad for themselves. For an hour and a half, he'd have all these various corporations come up and do an ad. You couldn't pay for that kind of advertising. And they also have lobbyists who give them heaps and heaps of money to ignore Medicare for all, like Obama did. He had the private health insurance industry giving him loads of money for his campaign, and that's why he ignored Medicare for all. And at the end of his presidency, Obama gave a speech where he just said to, I think it was the oil industry or the Wall Street, he said, just say thank you. In other words, he'd done all he could to help them profit, and he even said that, he was, they should be thanking him because they made a profit from him.
I know we're an oil country, and we need American energy, and by the way, American energy production. You wouldn't always know it, but it went up every year I was president. And that whole suddenly America's like the biggest oil producer and the biggest that was me, people. I just want you to it's a little like sometimes you go to Wall Street and folks will be grumbling about anti-business. And I said, have you checked where your stocks were when I came in office and where they are now? What are you talking? What are you complaining about? Just say thank you, please.
And then he got some $800,000 payment for doing a speech or something. That was also a kickback from helping out, Wall Street and corporations. So these people, they have ways of making profits. Look at Nancy Pelosi. She has $100 million and gourmet ice cream fridges that are really expensive. Talking about her ice cream. She's loaded with money, and that's not because, that's because she knows how to be paid by lobbyists. She knows how to work the system. So anyway, rampant cronyism and corruption, that's the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in a nutshell. Fraudulent elections. Now, this is an interesting one, because if ever there was a country that needed to have international oversight, it's the United States federal elections, or even the state elections, because when you look at how much voter suppression and, all the different things that are using these electronic machines that can be remotely hacked by a 12-year-old, even mail-in ballots, people will probably not receive those mail-in ballots, and they'll probably, if they send them off, anybody at the post office or anywhere else could see the postcode and sort of think, well, they're probably from a blue state, so I'm going to take all those ones that are from that blue state and just lose them. There's so many things, there's so much that goes on in the United States in fraudulent elections that, that's them in a nutshell, and yet they're always pointing the finger at Venezuela, who have the most transparent elections in the world, despite what you hear. They always claim that other countries have fraudulent elections if those countries have not submitted to the US. That's when they start to carry on about that. But the country, if the US is pointing the finger about something, they're talking about themselves, basically. You can see Pompeo, everything that Pompeo says pretty much everything he says on his Twitter feed is really something you could say the exact same thing about the United States. But anyway, so fraudulent elections, that's the United States. It's so bad. I mean, they should have ranked choice voting, they should have paper ballots, they should have international overseers like some other countries that they're always criticizing and saying that they're fraudulent. There's a whole bunch of things, basically, that they need. But while you've got all this going on, that's not going to happen. They need a fourth estate that isn't corporate owned. Their media is completely sewn up. Most of it is controlled by 6 corporations, and until you have a fourth estate that's going to tell the truth about government, and that's what they're supposed to be doing, until you have that, you don't have a democracy. We barely have one here in Australia because 75% of our media is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Those 14 defining characteristics of fascism, you could say that the United States pretty much has all of them to some degree. And when Trump, if he gets back in, which I think he still will despite his bungling of this COVID-19 crisis, because look at the alternative, a very weak alternative indeed. When he gets back in, this is going into overdrive. Those 14 characteristics are going to be very, very defined, and there will be no question. Because why wouldn't he? They're already there in place to some degree, and all he has to do is kick it over into full drive, and then there you go. He's a neo-fascist, and that's what he wants. And it's all about him. It's not about anybody else but him and his brand. And if he can use it to further his brand and to hang on to power, he will do that. And his base they don't need any excuse to turn into brown shirts. That's what Hitler did. Hitler basically, he didn't even really need to push people into becoming brown shirts. And what happened in the early stages of Nazi Germany is everything was so depressed, and there was so much poverty, and the Deutschmark, I think it wasn't worth very much. It was in a really sad state of affairs, which is where the US is in at the present time. Maybe not as bad as Germany at that stage, but that is the fertile ground for a fascist to come into power. And even if it isn't Trump, even if he doesn't go full-blown fascist, somebody after him, if the Democratic Party continue on the way they are, and if the corporate-owned media continue on the way they are, and if there is no ranked choice voting, and so no one else can ever get on the stage to say their piece, if all of that continues, and Trump is just another stepping stone to somebody worse than that, like say Eric Prince, who was the CEO of Blackwater, which is a mercenary group that used to commit war crimes in Iraq, and now they're called Academy. Well, he's also helping Trump. He's also advising Trump. He's an awful character, Eric Prince, but he's also happens to be a pretty boy, and he's a kind of blondish hair. I mean, the MAGA chuds will love him, and he's military. I mean, that's something they'd love too. So it's like, if he ran for president in 2024, I think he'd probably do very well, because I could see Trump sort of patting him on the back and showing him off to people. And why not? If he can't get his own son in or Ivanka Trump in, why not try and get Eric Prince in? I'm not sure why I think that Eric Prince is a candidate. I just do. It's like, I just feel like he's been behind the scenes advising Trump on this and that, and I think it might be the case that at some point he might run for president. And that's the kind of thing that will happen. It's just going to get more and more fascist-like people running for president, because there is no alternative. And as the US is becoming more and more of a failed state, and people are more desperate, it's people like that, like Eric Prince and the like, that will get a foothold, because they'll be looking for somebody who's a head kicker that they think is going to fight for them, even though they're never ever fighting for them. They're fighting for themselves, but pretend that they're fighting for the people. And over again, people are duped over and over again. But sometimes hate wins over being sensible, and people hating other minority groups and blaming them for their situation is something that's played out in history, all throughout history, rather than looking at the people in power. And they don't want you to look at them. They want you to look at disenfranchised groups and blame them for their situation. They want you to look at minority groups and blame them for the situation. And I see this thing with Trump also. It's like what's happening in the United States right now with the militarized police kicking heads and acting like they're raiding houses in Iraq, these militarized police, and kicking heads and spraying and punching journalists and shooting at journalists and all of that. I see this as something that had to happen eventually, because you can't have the kind of situation that's been unfolding over the decades, and the sort of disenfranchising of the public, basically making people more and more poor, and then the wealthy becoming richer and richer to ridiculous extremes, where somebody like Jeff Bezos could be a trillionaire in the next few years. And yet there are people working 3 jobs and they're still living in a homeless shelter because they can't afford. They can't make a living wage, more than a living wage. It can't even make a living wage, and they're doing 3 jobs. You can't have this sort of carrying on and on and on, and something bad not happen. And this is what's happening. It's almost like a boil. Trump is like a boil that you can't ignore. It's very painful, and it had to happen. And sometimes it's probably better, rather than this terrible dragging it out. Sometimes I've said to myself, I wish they'd just get it over with over there. They want full control. They want people to be almost like serfs. Just get it over with. Just rip the fucking bandage off. Rip it off. Because it's excruciating to watch. And it's excruciating to watch people like, people following, say, for example, Bernie Sanders, and knowing that he was going to betray them again. Again. It's excruciating to watch people all hopeful and smiling at the rallies and knowing he was going to bail, because he's not a true revolutionary. He never really was going to do a revolution. He was always beholden to the Democratic Party, and his favor from the Democratic Party was more important than the people he was representing. He doesn't want to be another Ralph Nader, he said. So this was bound to happen, and it's like a boil that needs to be lanced, and it needed to happen. And as painful as it is, and this empire is in a dangerous position now where it's falling. The US is a failed state. The empire is falling. It's flailing. It's desperate to maintain control in a world that wants to be a multipolar world. China, Russia, they all want a multipolar world. They do not want this unipolar world of the US dictating to everybody and invading. They don't want that. The rest of the world is waking up to the shit show that is the US empire. It's a rogue state, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, as Martin Luther King Jr. said. And it has to end, and it's falling, and it's very dangerous as it's falling. And that's what we're seeing right now. The sad thing is that if Trump gets in next, it's going to lurch into full-on fascism. And if it doesn't happen then, the next person that gets in is going to be a full-on fascist like Eric Prince. And then heaven knows what's going to happen then. I shudder. Today I had a gnarling pit in my stomach thinking, after I heard that speech from Trump about the 10 years and this recent thing about calling Antifa a terrorist organization, being anti-fascist now is being labeled a terrorist. when I saw that, I just thought, this is scary. Anyway, so thanks for watching. My name is Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Please keep your chin up, because I think something good could come of this. I think these protests have been very good. I hope that they continue on. They may not, now that these police officers have been charged. But this is a very good thing, because it shows it's much more than just the George Floyd murder. It's about the failed state that is the US, and people are waking up, and that's a great thing. So thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye for now.